Marcus and Tommy had been friends since childhood, but 43 years of life had dealt them vastly different hands. Marcus worked double shifts at the warehouse, while Tommy bounced between odd jobs, both men watching their dreams slip away one unpaid bill at a time. When the opportunity came to bid on abandoned shipping containers at the port auction, they pooled their last $800 together, hoping to find something they could resell for grocery money. Container 447 sat rusted and forgotten in the back corner of the lot. No other bidders showed interest in the corroded metal box that looked like it had been sitting underwater for years. The auctioneer barely glanced their way when Marcus raised his hand, with their winning bid of $300. But what connection did this container have to a decades-old art heist that had never been solved? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The warehouse time clock had been Marcus Rivera's constant companion for 17 years. Every morning at 5:47 a.m., he'd slide his card through the slot with the mechanical precision of a man who had long ago stopped hoping for anything different. The metallic click echoed through the empty break room, marking another day in a life that felt increasingly like a prison sentence. Marcus had grown up 3 blocks from where he now worked, in a neighborhood that had once buzzed with the energy of working families building something better. His childhood home, where his 70-year-old mother, Rosa, still lived, sat between 2 vacant lots where houses had been demolished and never replaced. The corner grocery store where he'd bought penny candy was now a check-cashing place with bulletproof glass. At 43, Marcus carried the weight of being his family's anchor. Rosa's diabetes medication cost more each month than most people spent on groceries, and the part-time home health aide ate up another chunk of his paycheck. His ex-wife, Linda, had remarried a man with better prospects 2 years ago, taking their daughter, Sophia, to live in the suburbs. The monthly child support payments stretched his budget to the breaking point, but seeing Sophia's smile during their weekend visits made every sacrifice worthwhile. Tommy Castellano had taken a different path through the same neighborhood. Where Marcus had chosen stability over opportunity, Tommy had chased dreams that always seemed to dissolve just as he reached for them. He'd tried everything, selling insurance, flipping houses during the brief real estate boom, even a disastrous 6-month stint running a food truck that specialized in gourmet grilled cheese. Sandwiches, Tommy's wife Maria had the patience of a saint and the practical wisdom that kept the household functioning. She worked as a dental hygienist, providing the steady income that allowed Tommy to pursue his various schemes. Their small apartment above her sister's bakery smelled perpetually of fresh bread and Maria's homemade coffee, creating a warmth that made up for the cramped quarters. The 2 men had remained friends through everything: Marcus's divorce, Tommy's business failures, the slow economic decline that had hollowed out their neighborhood. They met every Thursday evening at Rosario's bar, a dive that had somehow survived while classier establishments closed around it. The ritual never varied: 2 beers each, a shared plate of nachos, and conversation that ranged from complaints about the weather to dreams they were too old to pursue. It was during one of these Thursday sessions that Tommy had first mentioned the container auctions. He'd been helping his brother-in-law clear out a storage unit when they'd encountered a man who made his living buying abandoned containers at the port. "You wouldn't believe what people ship and then forget about," Tommy had explained, his eyes bright with possibility. "Electronics, furniture, sometimes even vehicles. This guy showed me pictures of a container he bought for $500. Inside was $15,000 worth of motorcycle parts." Marcus had listened with the weary skepticism that came from watching Tommy chase too many get-rich-quick schemes. But something about this idea felt different. It wasn't asking them to create something from nothing or convince other people to buy something they didn't need. It was simply a matter of being smart about recognizing value that others had overlooked. The Port Authority held auctions twice a month for containers that had been abandoned by their owners. The reasons varied: bankruptcy, shipping company disputes, customs problems that made retrieval too expensive. Most containers sold for a few $100s to dealers who had the experience to spot potential treasures among the apparent junk. Marcus had done his research, spending his lunch breaks at the library's computer terminal learning about the auction process. The rules were straightforward. Inspection was limited to looking through the open doors for exactly 5 minutes. Bidding was cash only, and buyers had to remove contents within 48 hours. We could start small, Tommy had argued during their most recent Thursday meeting. Pool our money, buy one container, see what happens. If we lose our investment, we're out a few $100. If we find something good, we split the profit and use it to buy bigger containers. Marcus had calculated the risk carefully. They could afford to lose $300 without missing rent or falling behind on essential bills. The potential upside, while uncertain, was significantly higher than anything their savings accounts would ever generate. The decision to attend their first auction had felt momentous, like stepping across a threshold they couldn't uncross. Marcus had requested a personal day from work, his first in 3 years, and Tommy had borrowed his brother-in-law's pickup truck. They'd driven to the port that morning with $800 in cash and absolutely no idea what they were doing. The auction paddle felt heavier than its plastic construction warranted as Marcus gripped number 47 in his sweating palm. The Port of Elizabeth stretched endlessly around them, a maze of shipping containers stacked like building blocks against the grey October sky. Massive cranes moved with mechanical precision overhead, loading and unloading cargo ships that looked like floating cities. Tommy stood beside him, trying to project confidence while his leg bounced with nervous energy. They'd arrived 2 hours early, determined to observe the process before participating. The crowd of regular bidders had the casual expertise of people who'd done this countless times before. "First time?" asked a woman in paint-splattered overalls, noticing their obvious anxiety. Her name tag read Betty, and she carried herself with the authority of someone who knew every container's history before it hit the auction block. "That obvious?" Tommy replied with a self-deprecating grin. Betty laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "You've got that deer-in-headlights look. Been coming to these auctions for 12 years. Word of advice: don't get caught up in bidding wars your first time out. Set a limit and stick to it." The auctioneer, a surprisingly young man named Dave, explained the rules with practiced efficiency. Each container would be open for exactly 5 minutes of inspection. No touching the contents, no moving items around, just looking. Bidding started at $50 and proceeded in $25 increments until someone won or the container went unsold. The first container yielded a collection of restaurant equipment that sparked intense bidding between two dealers. Marcus watched the price climb from $50 to $800 in less than 3 minutes, far beyond anything he and Tommy could afford. "Commercial kitchen stuff always goes high," Betty explained. "Restaurant owners are always looking for deals on equipment." Container after container revealed their secrets to the small crowd. Household furniture that looked promising until someone spotted water damage. Boxes of clothing that might be valuable vintage or worthless surplus. A container full of children's toys that went for $1,200 to a woman who ran an online resale business. Marcus felt increasingly out of his depth. The experienced bidders seemed to spot details he couldn't see, making split-second evaluations based on knowledge he didn't possess. When Tommy nudged him and pointed toward container 447, Marcus wondered if they were making a terrible mistake. The container sat apart from the others, its exterior showing significant rust and weather damage. Where most containers displayed shipping labels and company logos, 447 bore only faded paint and the ghostly outlines of removed stickers. Even from a distance, it looked like something that had been forgotten by everyone who'd ever owned it. "Nobody's even looking at that one," Tommy whispered as they approached for the inspection period. Dave jimmied the corroded lock and pulled open the heavy doors with obvious effort. The smell hit them immediately: musty cardboard, damp fabric, and the metallic scent of rust. Inside, cardboard boxes were stacked floor to ceiling, many showing water stains and structural damage. Moldy blankets covered irregular shapes that could have been anything from furniture to machinery. "Jesus," muttered one of the other bidders. Before walking away without a second glance, Marcus peered into the gloom, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Most of the boxes bore no labels or identification. The few that showed writing displayed only cryptic codes that meant nothing to him. Everything visible looked damaged, worthless, or both. 5 minutes, Dave announced, starting his stopwatch. Tommy squeezed past Marcus to get a better look. "Some of this stuff might clean up okay," he said quietly, pointing to what appeared to be furniture wrapped in protective plastic beneath the moldy blankets. "Or it might all be garbage," Marcus replied, but something about the container intrigued him. The careful way items had been packed suggested someone had valued these contents enough to ship them properly. The fact that everything was wrapped and protected, even beneath the surface damage, hinted at original quality. Betty appeared beside them, shaking her head. "Water damage kills resale value," she said definitively. "Whatever's in those boxes is probably ruined." As the 5-minute inspection period ended and Dave closed the doors, Marcus realized they were the only bidders still standing near container 4147. When the auction began, Dave's opening call for $50 was met with silence. "Do I hear 50? 25, anyone?" Tommy caught Marcus's eye and raised their paddle. 25, he called out. 25 from number 47. "Do I hear 50? The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Sold to 47 for $25. They'd won their first container for less than a tank of gas. The waterlogged cardboard boxes seemed to mock their optimism as Marcus and Tommy stood before the open container, borrowed bolt cutters still warm in Tommy's hands. The lock had come off easier than expected, but what lay beyond the corroded doors was far worse than their brief inspection had suggested. "Maybe we should have bid on that restaurant equipment," Marcus muttered, pulling work gloves over his hands. The October air carried a chill that made the damp smell emanating from the container even more unpleasant. Tommy's brother-in-law had lent them his pickup truck with the understanding they'd return it before dinner. That gave them exactly 4 hours to load, transport, and unload whatever they'd purchased for $25. Now facing the reality of water-damaged cardboard and moldy fabric, 4 hours seemed overly generous. The first box Marcus lifted disintegrated in his hands, spilling what appeared to be rotted clothing onto the container floor. The fabric, once possibly expensive, now bore the grey-green stains of prolonged moisture exposure. Tommy grabbed another box, testing its structural integrity before attempting to move it. "This one's solid," he announced, hoisting a medium-sized container that, despite surface water stains, seemed to have protected its contents. Whatever's inside stayed dry. They worked systematically, testing each box and bundle before loading it into the truck. The damaged items outnumbered the salvageable ones by a significant margin, but Marcus found himself impressed by the original packing job. Someone had taken considerable care, wrapping items in multiple layers of plastic and padding, suggesting the contents had once been valuable enough to warrant protection. "Look at this!" Tommy called from the back of the container, where he discovered several items wrapped in what appeared to be moving blankets. Beneath the surface mold, the blankets were thick and well-made, the kind of protection used by professional moving companies for high-end items. As they loaded the truck, a pattern emerged. Despite the water damage and deterioration, the original contents had been packed with unusual care. Fragile items were cushioned with professional-grade materials. Papers and documents were sealed in plastic sleeves. Even the clothing, ruined as it was, had been folded and wrapped with attention to detail. Whoever packed this stuff knew what they were doing, Marcus observed, securing a bundle that felt suspiciously like a picture frame, wrapped in multiple layers of bubble wrap and plastic. An elderly security guard wandered over as they worked, curiosity apparently getting the better of his professional indifference. "You boys know that container's been sitting here for almost 3 years?" he said, lighting a cigarette with hands that showed decades of manual labor. 3 years. Tommy stopped loading to look at the man. "Why so long?" The guard shrugged. "Shipping company went bankrupt. Container got caught up in legal disputes. Nobody wanted to pay the storage fees, so it just sat here gathering rust." He took a long drag from his cigarette. "Could have been valuable once, but 3 years of weather will ruin most anything." After the guard moved on, Marcus and Tommy continued loading in thoughtful silence. The idea that their container had been abandoned for legal rather than financial reasons added another layer of mystery to their purchase. What kind of legal dispute would leave valuable items sitting in a container for 3 years? The last items in the container proved the most intriguing. Hidden beneath the moldy blankets, they discovered several pieces that had been wrapped with extraordinary care. One felt unmistakably like a large picture frame, protected by multiple layers of plastic and cushioned with foam padding. Another had the shape and weight of a small sculpture, wrapped so thoroughly it was impossible to determine what lay beneath. "These feel expensive," Tommy said, carefully maneuvering what appeared to be a small chest or jewelry box into the truck. Despite the container's exterior deterioration, this item showed no signs of water damage. By the time they'd loaded everything salvageable, the truck bed was half full of mysterious bundles and boxes. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the port as they secured their cargo with borrowed tie-downs and prepared for the drive to Tommy's garage. $25, Marcus said, looking back at the empty container that had surrendered its secrets to their persistence. "Plus gas and truck rental," Tommy added with his characteristic optimism. "Call it $50 total. If we can sell half this stuff for $100, we've doubled our money." As they drove away from the port, Marcus found himself cautiously hopeful for the first time in months. They might have bought someone else's abandoned problems, but those problems were now theirs to solve. And sometimes, he reflected, other people's problems contained solutions you'd never thought to look for. Tommy's garage had never been intended for fine art analysis, but that's exactly what it had become by Sunday afternoon. The concrete floor was covered with salvaged items in various stages of unwrapping, while the overhead fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows that made everything look either more valuable or more worthless than it actually was. Marcus carefully peeled away another layer of plastic wrap from what they'd thought was a picture frame. The protective covering had done its job. Beneath the industrial-grade wrapping, the item was completely dry. But what emerged wasn't the cheap print or family photograph they'd expected. "Tommy," Marcus said quietly, "you need to see this." The painting was small, maybe 18 inches square, but something about it commanded attention. The surface showed the kind of texture and depth that only came from real paint applied with deliberate skill. Abstract shapes in deep reds and blacks seemed to move in the flickering garage light, creating an effect that was both beautiful and slightly unsettling. Tommy looked up from the jewelry box he'd been examining. Inside the small chest, they'd already discovered several pieces that looked suspiciously expensive. Gold that didn't tarnish, gems that caught light with unusual brilliance. He set down a necklace that might have been vintage Cartier and moved to examine Marcus's find. "Is that—" Tommy squinted at the painting, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "Does that look like real art to you?" Marcus turned the piece over, looking for signatures or identifying marks. In the bottom right corner, barely visible in the abstract composition, were initials that looked like they might be MR. The back of the canvas showed the kind of professional mounting and labeling that suggested gallery quality. "There's a lot more where that came from," Marcus said, gesturing toward 3 similar-sized packages they hadn't yet unwrapped. "And some bigger pieces, too." They'd been working since early morning, methodically unwrapping and cataloguing their finds. What had initially appeared to be water-damaged junk was revealing itself to be a carefully curated collection of valuable items. Along with the paintings, they discovered sculptures that felt like bronze rather than cheap metal, books that might be first editions, and even some jewelry that sparkled with the kind of fire that suggested real diamonds. Tommy picked up one of the larger wrapped pieces, feeling its weight and dimensions. This one's heavy. Really heavy, like it might be made of stone or something. Should we unwrap it? I'm starting to think we should be more careful about this whole thing. What if this stuff is actually valuable? What if we damage something worth thousands of dollars because we're handling it in a garage? Marcus had been thinking the same thing. The more items they examined, the more convinced he became that they'd stumbled onto something significant. The level of care taken in packing these items, the quality of materials they were discovering, the professional way everything had been wrapped and protected, none of it suggested the kind of collection that would be abandoned lightly. "We need to do some research," Marcus said, photographing the small painting with his phone. "Figure out what we're dealing with before we go any further." Tommy nodded, then froze as something caught his eye. He was holding a piece of cardboard that had been used as backing for one of the picture frames, and when he'd accidentally torn it while unwrapping, something had fallen out. "Marcus, look at this." It was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, but protected from moisture by its placement inside the cardboard backing. Tommy unfolded it carefully, revealing what appeared to be some kind of official document with letterhead from Metropolitan Museum Insurance Services. The document was dated 15 years earlier and contained detailed descriptions of artwork being transported for a special exhibition. Marcus read over Tommy's shoulder as they scanned the list. Mark Rothko, untitled work, oil on canvas, estimated value $2.3 million. Henri Matisse, bronze sculpture, estimated value $890,000. "This is an insurance document," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "These are museum pieces." Tommy's hands were shaking as he continued reading. "Marcus, there are 12 items on this list. We've unwrapped maybe half of what we pulled from that container." They looked around the garage at their afternoon's work with new eyes. The small painting Marcus had been handling so casually might be worth more than both their houses combined. The bronze sculpture Tommy had been moving around might be a masterpiece by one of the most famous artists in history. "What the hell did we buy?" Tommy asked. The provenance documentation felt like holding a live wire as Marcus spread the papers across Tommy's kitchen table. Maria had taken one look at their expressions and retreated to the living room with her sister, leaving the two men to process what they'd discovered in the fluorescent-lit silence of the garage. 3 more documents had been hidden in various packaging throughout their collection. Each one detailed different aspects of what appeared to be a major art exhibition from 1987. The papers bore official seals, insurance stamps, and the kind of bureaucratic language that suggested legitimate institutional involvement. Metropolitan Museum of Art, Special Exhibition, Post-War American Masters, Marcus read aloud from the primary document. "Featuring works on loan from private collectors and international galleries." Tommy traced his finger down the detailed inventory list. "Rothko, Pollock, de Kooning, Motherwell. These aren't just famous artists. These are like legendary famous artists. The kind of names even I know. And I failed art class in high school. The estimated values listed on the insurance documents made both men uncomfortable. Individual pieces were appraised at amounts that represented lifetimes of warehouse wages. The total collection value, calculated at the bottom of the final page, exceeded $20 million. "This has to be some kind of mistake," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. The documentation was too detailed, too professional, too consistent across multiple forms to be anything other than authentic. Tommy had pulled out his laptop and was searching for information about the 1987 exhibition. What he found made their situation infinitely more complicated. "Marcus, listen to this. On October 15, 1987, a truck carrying artwork valued at over $20 million disappeared en route from the Metropolitan Museum of Art to LaGuardia Airport. The works, on loan for a special exhibition, were being returned to their owners when the transport vehicle vanished without a trace. Despite extensive FBI investigation, neither the artwork nor the perpetrators were ever found. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire they couldn't extinguish. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the implications became clear. They weren't just dealing with valuable artwork, they were dealing with stolen artwork. Stolen from one of the most famous museums in the world. "We have to call the police," Marcus said, but Tommy was already shaking his head. "And tell them what? That we accidentally bought stolen art at a container auction. That we've been handling evidence in criminal investigation for the past 2 days. Tommy's voice rose with panic. "Marcus, we could go to prison for this. We didn't know. You think that matters? We're 2 guys from the neighborhood with prior records who suddenly show up with $20 million worth of stolen art. Who's going to believe we just stumbled onto this?" Marcus had to admit Tommy had a point. His own record consisted of 1 arrest for bar fight in his 20s, but Tommy's history was more complicated. A series of bad checks during his restaurant venture had resulted in a suspended sentence and community service. Neither of them looked like the kind of people who legitimately acquired museum-quality artwork. "So what do we do?" Marcus asked. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents as if they might transform into something less dangerous. "We need to understand what we're dealing with before we make any decisions. Maybe there's a way to return this stuff without destroying our lives in the process." They spent the next several hours researching the 1987 heist online. The crime had been meticulously planned and flawlessly executed. A legitimate transport truck had been hijacked just outside the city. The driver had been found tied up but unharmed in a warehouse 3 days later. The artwork had simply vanished into the underground market for stolen goods. "Look at this," Tommy said, pointing to an article from 5 years after the theft. "The FBI thinks the artwork was shipped overseas immediately after the heist. They investigated galleries in Switzerland, Japan, even private collectors in Russia. Nobody ever thought it might still be sitting in a container in New Jersey." Marcus studied photographs of the original pieces, comparing them to what they'd discovered in Tommy's garage. The matches were unmistakable. They had authentic works by some of the most celebrated artists of the 20th century sitting between a toolbox and a broken lawnmower. "There's something else," Tommy said quietly. "The insurance payouts on this theft totaled $18 million. The insurance companies that paid those claims now technically own this artwork. Even if we wanted to return it to the museum, we'd have to deal with multiple insurance companies who might consider us liable for storage fees, damage, or God knows what else." Marcus closed the laptop and looked around Tommy's modest kitchen. Yesterday, their biggest concern had been whether they could flip container contents for enough money to try again next month. They were sitting on evidence of one of the most famous art thefts in American history, with no clear path forward that didn't involve lawyers, investigators, or prison cells. "We're in way over our heads," Marcus said. "Yeah," Tommy agreed. "But we're in it together." The cell phone photo that would change everything was taken at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus had been showing pictures of their garage sale finds to his co-worker Danny during lunch break, trying to gauge whether they might have stumbled onto anything valuable enough to consult a professional appraiser. "This one's kind of interesting," Marcus said, swiping to the image of the small Rothko painting. "My buddy thinks it might be worth getting looked at." Danny squinted at the phone screen, his sandwich forgotten as he studied the abstract composition. "Dude, that looks like real museum stuff. My ex-girlfriend was an art student. She dragged me to enough galleries that I know expensive when I see it." The conversation might have ended there, but Danny had a habit of taking pictures of interesting things he encountered throughout the day. Before Marcus realized what was happening, Danny had snapped a photo of the phone screen showing the Rothko. "Just want to show my cousin," Danny explained. "She's got an art degree, works at some gallery downtown. She'd get a kick out of seeing something this fancy." Marcus felt a chill of unease, but couldn't think of a reasonable way to object without seeming suspicious. The damage was done. By evening, Danny's cousin had shared the image with her gallery colleagues. one of whom recognized the distinctive style and forwarded it to a contact in the art authentication business. Tommy's mistake happened 3 hours later at Rosario's bar, where he'd gone to celebrate their good fortune with a beer and the company of familiar faces. The conversation had started innocently enough, Tommy mentioning that he and Marcus had hit it big at the container auction. "How big?" asked Jerry, a regular who drove truck for a furniture delivery company. "Let's just say we might not need day jobs much longer," Tommy replied, the beer making him more talkative than usual. "No kidding. What did you find? A container full of electronics?" Tommy pulled out his phone, intending to show just one picture of their least valuable find. But alcohol and excitement made him careless. Soon he was swiping through multiple images, pointing out details that suggested professional quality and significant value. "This stuff looks like it belongs in a museum," Jerry observed, and several other patrons crowded around to see what had generated so much interest. Among those patrons was Ray Kowalski, a man whose legitimate income from construction work was supplemented by less legal activities involving the resale of items that occasionally fell off trucks. Ray had developed an eye for valuable merchandise and an extensive network of contacts who dealt in goods that didn't always come with proper documentation. By Wednesday morning, Ray had shared Tommy's photos with 3 different people, each of whom specialized in moving high-end merchandise through channels that avoided traditional retail markup and inconvenient questions about ownership history. The phone call came Thursday afternoon. Marcus was operating a forklift in the warehouse when his supervisor approached with the news that someone was asking for him at the front office. "Says he's from an insurance company," the supervisor explained. "Something about property recovery." Marcus's blood pressure spiked as he made his way to the office, where a well-dressed man in his 50s was waiting with a business card and an expression of professional concern. "Mr. Rivera, I'm William Foster from Consolidated Art Recovery Services. I understand you and your partner recently acquired some artwork through a container purchase." "I'm not sure what you mean," Marcus replied, but Foster was already pulling out a tablet computer. "Social media is a wonderful thing," Foster said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Images have a way of traveling through networks faster than people realize. We represent insurance companies that have outstanding claims on certain pieces that may match items in your possession." Marcus stared at the tablet screen, which displayed the exact photo Danny had taken of his phone. Below it were thumbnail images of other pieces from their collection, apparently captured from Tommy's bar conversation and shared across whatever network Foster monitored. "Of course, we understand that you acquired these items innocently," Foster continued. "Container auctions are perfectly legal, and buyers can't be expected to research the provenance of every purchase. But the insurance companies we represent do have legitimate ownership claims on certain pieces." "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that Consolidated Art Recovery would like to arrange a consultation with you and your partner. We can discuss fair compensation for your time and trouble, while ensuring that certain valuable items find their way back to their rightful owners." Foster handed Marcus a business card. "No pressure, of course. But Mr. Rivera, you should know that word of your discovery is already spreading through several communities. Not all of the people who might contact you will be as reasonable as we are." After Foster left, Marcus sat in his truck in the warehouse parking lot, hands shaking as he called Tommy. "How many people did you show those pictures to?" he asked without preamble. "Just a few guys at the bar. Why?" "Because someone from an insurance company just paid me a visit at work. Tommy, people know. And if Foster found us this easily, we're about to have a lot more company." The business card from Foster's Art Recovery Services felt like a piece of evidence that could either save them or damn them, depending on who else wanted to examine it. Marcus had been carrying it in his wallet for 2 days, pulling it out periodically to study the professional logo and wonder whether Foster represented salvation or a more sophisticated form of trap. The First sign that their situation was deteriorating came Friday morning when Marcus found a different man waiting by his truck in the warehouse parking lot. This visitor wore an expensive suit, but carried himself with the kind of casual menace that suggested his business cards didn't tell the whole story. "Marcus Rivera," the man asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Name's Vincent Torino. I represent some people who are very interested in your recent acquisition." "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus replied. But Torino was already pulling out his own tablet computer. "Course you don't, but see, my associates have been tracking certain items for a very long time. Items that disappeared from legitimate ownership back in the 80s. Items that recently started showing up in social media posts from this area." Torino's tablet displayed the same photos Foster had shown him, but with additional information: address records, vehicle registrations, even what appeared to be surveillance photos of Tommy's garage taken from across the street. "Now, I want you to understand something," Torino continued, his voice remaining conversational despite the implied threat. "My people aren't unreasonable. They understand that you stumbled into this situation accidentally, but they also understand that certain items have been missing for a long time, and their patience isn't unlimited." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. "What do you want?" "A conversation, tonight, 7 o'clock. There's a coffee shop called Meridian on Route 9. You and your partner show up. We discuss terms for a mutually beneficial arrangement. Everybody walks away happy, and if we don't..." Torino's smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. "Mr. Rivera, you seem like a smart guy. I'm sure you'll make the right decision." After Torino left, Marcus called Tommy with hands that shook so badly he could barely dial. "We've got problems." "Big problems." They met at Tommy's garage an hour later, where they discovered that Torino's people weren't the only ones who'd been watching. A woman in her 30s was sitting in a sedan across the street, making no effort to conceal her surveillance. When Tommy waved at her, she simply nodded and continued taking notes. "Federal agents," said a voice behind them. They turned to find a man in his 40s approaching from the direction of the bakery. His hands empty, but his jacket cut loose enough to conceal whatever he might be carrying. Special Agent David Chen, FBI Art Crime Division. "We need to talk." Chen's credentials looked authentic, but Marcus had reached the point where he trusted nothing at face value. The agent seemed to understand their skepticism and maintained a respectful distance while explaining his presence. "The 1987 Metropolitan Museum theft is still an active investigation," Chen explained. "When certain images started circulating through law enforcement networks, they triggered automatic alerts in our system. We've been tracking this case for 15 years. Are we under arrest?" Tommy asked. "Not at this time. You've committed no crime that we're aware of. But Mr. Castellano, Mr. Rivera, you've inadvertently made yourselves persons of interest in a federal investigation. More importantly, you've attracted attention from people who definitely have committed crimes." Chen explained that the FBI had been monitoring communications related to the stolen artwork for years. Recent chatter in criminal networks suggested that multiple parties were converging on their location, drawn by the social media circulation of images from their collection. "Torino is small-time muscle," Chen said. "He works for people who've been trying to recover these pieces through unofficial channels. But there are others, international dealers, organized crime figures, even some legitimate collectors who aren't too concerned about provenance. All of them are going to want to have a conversation with you. What do you suggest we do?" Marcus asked. "Cooperate with the investigation. Help us recover the stolen artwork and testify against whoever was responsible for storing it in that container. In exchange, we can offer witness protection and a substantial reward from the insurance companies." Tommy looked at Marcus, both men realizing they were facing a decision that would reshape their lives regardless of what they chose. "What about Torino's meeting tonight?" Tommy asked. "That's your decision. But if you go, you should know that we'll be watching. And you should also know that once you start negotiating with people like Torino, it becomes very difficult to walk away from those relationships." Chen handed them each a card with a direct phone number. Think about it, but don't think too long. The longer these items remain in your possession, the more dangerous your situation becomes. The newspaper clipping from October 16, 1987, was yellowed with age, but preserved between the pages of a library art book that Marcus had been using to research their collection. The headline read, "Museum Heist, 20 million in art vanishes," in bold type that conveyed the shock of a crime that had captivated the nation's attention. Marcus spread the article across the kitchen table while Tommy made coffee with hands that hadn't stopped, shaking since Agent Chen's visit. The morning sunlight streaming through Maria's lace curtains felt surreal given the magnitude of what they were reading about their own situation. The thieves knew exactly what they were looking for. Marcus read aloud from the detailed account. According to Museum Security Director James Walsh, the perpetrators bypassed numerous valuable pieces to focus, specifically on works that were being returned to private collectors. After the special exhibition, Tommy set down 2 mugs of coffee and leaned over Marcus's shoulder. So this wasn't random. They targeted specific pieces. Listen to this part, Marcus continued. The heist was orchestrated with precision that suggested inside knowledge of museum security procedures and transport schedules. The hijacked truck was found abandoned 3 days later in Queens, wiped clean of fingerprints and evidence. The article included quotes from FBI investigators who admitted they had few leads, despite the high-profile nature of the crime. The stolen artwork had been destined for collectors in 3 different countries, making international cooperation essential, but complicated. Most telling was a comment from the lead investigator. This type of theft is typically commissioned by private collectors who have no intention of reselling the pieces. The artwork could remain hidden for decades. Tommy pulled out his phone and began searching for follow-up articles about the investigation. What he found painted a picture of a case that had frustrated law enforcement for 15 years. Despite rewards totaling over $2 million and international cooperation with art recovery specialists, not a single piece had ever been recovered. Here's something interesting, Tommy said, reading from a 2001 article. The FBI believes the artwork was shipped overseas immediately after the theft, possibly to Switzerland or Hong Kong, where private art storage is less regulated. They investigated over 200 potential buyers in 12 countries. Marcus studied a photograph of the crime scene, the abandoned truck surrounded by police vehicles and federal agents. The professional nature of the operation was evident even in the newspaper photos. These weren't opportunistic criminals who had stumbled into a major score. They were professionals who had planned every detail of the heist. What I don't understand, Marcus said, is how the artwork ended up in a shipping container in New Jersey. If they moved it overseas like the FBI thinks, how did it get back? Tommy had been wondering the same thing. Maybe it never left. Maybe the FBI was wrong about the international angle, or maybe someone brought it back. Think about it. If you were a collector who had commissioned the theft, and you wanted to eventually move the pieces without attracting attention, you might store them for years until the investigation cooled down. They found more pieces of the puzzle in subsequent articles. The insurance payouts had been massive, effectively transferring ownership of the stolen artwork to various insurance companies. The Metropolitan Museum had been forced to review its security procedures and had never again attempted to transport multiple high-value pieces simultaneously. "Look at this," Tommy said, pointing to an article from 2000. One of the insurance companies hired private investigators to continue searching for the artwork after the FBI scaled back their active investigation. The private investigators focused on underground art markets in major cities. Marcus felt a chill as he realized the implications. So there are people who've been actively hunting for this stuff for 15 years. People with resources and connections we can't even imagine. The final piece of information that made their situation clear came from an article published on the 10th anniversary of the theft. A quote from the insurance company executive was unambiguous. These pieces represent the largest unsolved art theft in American history. We will never stop looking for them, and we will prosecute anyone involved in their concealment or sale to the full extent of the law." "They're not talking about the original thieves," Marcus said quietly. "They're talking about anyone who ends up with the artwork for any reason." Tommy closed the laptop and looked around his modest kitchen as if seeing it for the last time. "Marcus, we're not just dealing with criminals who want to steal from us. We're dealing with insurance companies that consider us criminals for having this stuff in the first place. What do you think happened to whoever stored it in that container?" "I don't know. But whoever they were, they're not around to explain how $20 million worth of stolen art ended up abandoned in a New Jersey port for 3 years. The implications hung in the air, between them like smoke from a fire they couldn't extinguish. The intimidating black SUV had been parked across from Tommy's garage for 3 hours when Marcus arrived for their emergency meeting. The vehicle's tinted windows and pristine condition stood out in a neighborhood where most cars showed the wear of daily struggle, and its occupants had made no effort to disguise their surveillance. "They showed up around noon," Tommy said, leading Marcus through the bakery to avoid walking past the SUV. "2 guys in suits. They haven't gotten out, but they've been taking pictures of everyone who comes and goes." Marcus peered through the bakery's front window at the vehicle. Even from a distance, something about it projected menace. The SUV was too clean, too expensive, too deliberately positioned to be anything other than a message. "Did you call Agent Chen?" Marcus asked. "Left 3 messages. His voicemail says he's in court all day." Tommy's voice carried the strain of someone who hadn't slept since their last conversation. "Marcus, I think we're running out of time to handle this through official channels." They made their way to the garage through the bakery's rear entrance, where the sight of their wrapped artwork now felt more like evidence at a crime scene than treasure waiting to be claimed. What had seemed like incredible good fortune less than a week ago now felt like a death sentence they'd imposed on themselves. Through sheer ignorance, the break-in attempt had happened the previous night while Tommy and Maria were visiting her sister. The would-be intruders had been skilled enough to disable the garage's security system and pick the locks without leaving obvious signs of forced entry. Only Tommy's paranoid decision to hide a motion-activated camera inside a toolbox had revealed what had actually occurred. "Watch this," Tommy said, pulling up the footage on his laptop. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. when 2 figures in dark clothing entered the garage. They moved with professional efficiency, systematically examining the wrapped artwork without unwrapping anything. They knew exactly what they were looking for, Marcus observed as the figures consulted what appeared to be a detailed list while examining each piece. "They're not random thieves hoping to grab something valuable. They're looking for specific items." The intruders had spent almost an hour in the garage, photographing each piece from multiple angles and taking measurements that suggested they were creating a detailed inventory. What disturbed Marcus most was their obvious expertise. These were people who understood art, who could evaluate wrapped pieces based on dimensions and weight alone. "They left without taking anything," Tommy said, as the footage showed the figures departing as quietly as they'd arrived. "Like they were just confirming that we actually have what they think we have." A new vehicle had appeared outside while they watched the footage, a white panel van that parked directly behind the black SUV. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he realized their watchers were being watched by additional parties. "How many different groups do you think are interested in this stuff?" Tommy asked. Before Marcus could answer, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was professionally polite, but carried an undertone that suggested politeness was optional. "Mr. Rivera, this is Michael Carbone. I represent certain parties who have a legitimate interest in the items currently stored in your associate's garage. We'd like to arrange a meeting to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to this situation." "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Of course. But Mr. Rivera, you should understand that the current situation isn't sustainable. Multiple parties are now aware of your discovery, and not all of them share our preference for negotiated solutions. We're prepared to offer you and Mr. Castellano substantial compensation for your cooperation. What kind of compensation? The kind that would allow you both to disappear permanently, if that's what you choose. New identities, relocation expenses, enough money to start over wherever you'd like. All we ask in return is access to the collection and your agreement to never discuss this matter with law enforcement or media. Marcus looked at Tommy, who had been listening to the conversation with growing alarm. The offer was seductive in its simplicity. Walk away with enough money to solve all their problems, leaving behind the stress and danger that had consumed their lives since opening container 447. We need time to think about it, Marcus said. Of course. But Mr. Rivera, I should mention that our offer has an expiration date. Other parties are becoming impatient, and their methods are considerably less civilized than ours. You have until tomorrow evening to decide. After hanging up, Marcus and Tommy sat in the dim garage, surrounded by artwork that had become more curse than blessing. Through the small window, they could see both surveillance vehicles maintaining their watch, patient predators waiting for the right moment to strike. "What do you think?" Tommy asked. "I think we're about to find out what $20 million is really worth." Agent Chen's FBI badge felt surprisingly light in Marcus's hands as he examined the metal shield and identification card that had arrived by special courier that morning. The accompanying note was brief but urgent. "Meet me at the Federal Building downtown at 3 p.m. Come alone. Trust no one else." Tommy had argued against the meeting, convinced that federal involvement would only complicate their already impossible situation. But Marcus felt they had run out of alternatives. The criminal offers were becoming more aggressive, the surveillance more obvious, and their ability to control events was deteriorating by the hour. The Federal Building in Newark was a fortress of concrete and steel that seemed designed to intimidate anyone approaching its entrance. Marcus passed through multiple security checkpoints before being escorted to a conference room where Chen waited with 3 other agents and enough documentation to suggest this meeting had been planned for much longer than the recent discovery of their container. "Mr. Rivera, thank you for coming," Chen said, gesturing to a chair facing a wall of photographs and evidence boards. "I want you to understand the full scope of what you've stumbled into." The photos showed surveillance images dating back 15 years, criminal associates, suspected art dealers, even legitimate collectors who had been investigated in connection with the museum theft. Marcus recognized some faces from recent encounters, including Torino and the man who had called himself Carbone. The 1987 heist wasn't a one-time operation, Chen explained. It was part of a sophisticated network that has been stealing and trafficking high-value artwork for decades. The pieces you found represent just one collection in a much larger criminal enterprise. Agent Sarah Martinez, a specialist in art crimes, spread additional documents across the table. "We've been tracking this network through 12 states and 6 countries. The individuals who've contacted you aren't just trying to recover stolen artwork. They're trying to protect a multi-million-dollar operation that extends far beyond your discovery." Marcus studied the organizational charts and financial records that painted a picture of criminal sophistication he hadn't imagined. The theft of museum pieces was apparently just one revenue stream in an enterprise that included forgery, smuggling, and the manipulation of art markets through artificial scarcity. "Where do Tommy and I fit into this?" Marcus asked. "You're witnesses to evidence we've been trying to gather for 15 years, said Agent Robert Kim, who had been introduced as a financial crime specialist. "More importantly, you're the first people who can testify about the storage and transport methods used by this network." Chen pulled out a thick folder marked Witness Protection Protocols and set it on the table in front of Marcus. "We're prepared to offer you and Mr. Castellano complete protection in exchange for your cooperation. New identities, relocation, financial support during the transition. What exactly would we have to do? Help us recover the artwork safely. Testify about how you acquired it and what you've observed since. Most importantly, allow us to use your situation to draw out other members of the criminal network. Martinez leaned forward with an intensity that suggested personal investment in the case. Mr. Rivera, this network has been responsible for dozens of thefts from museums, galleries, and private collections. They've corrupted auction houses, bribed customs officials, and eliminated witnesses who threatened their operations. Your discovery gives us the first real opportunity to bring them down. Marcus felt the weight of decisions that would reshape not just his life, but Tommy's as well. The federal protection offer was comprehensive, but came with the understanding that their old lives would essentially end. New names, new locations, new histories that would separate them from everyone they'd ever known. What about our families? Marcus asked, thinking of his mother's medical needs and his daughter's weekend visits. Complete relocation for immediate family members who choose to participate, Kim replied. We understand that witness protection is only effective if witnesses feel secure about their loved one's safety. Chen showed Marcus photographs of what appeared to be crime scenes, galleries that had been robbed, collectors who had been intimidated, even one image that might have been a murder scene. Mr. Rivera, the people who've been contacting you don't negotiate indefinitely. When they decide that cooperation isn't possible, they eliminate problems. How much time do we have to decide? Based on surveillance reports, we estimate you have less than 48 hours before someone decides to take direct action. The criminal offers you've received are becoming ultimatums. Marcus looked around the conference room at agents who represented his best hope for survival, while understanding that accepting their protection meant abandoning everything that had defined his identity for 43 years. I need to discuss this with Tommy, he said finally. Of course. But Mr. Rivera, when you leave this building, assume that every conversation is being monitored and every movement is being tracked. The decision you and Mr. Castellano make will determine whether you live to see next month the forged insurance document that Tommy discovered hidden in his own paperwork felt like a betrayal of everything they had trusted about their situation. The letterhead was identical to the legitimate documents they had found in the container, but the policy numbers and claims details told a completely different story. Marcus, look at this, Tommy said, his voice tight with panic as he spread the papers across his kitchen table. This isn't from the container. This was in my file cabinet, mixed in with my car insurance papers. Marcus examined the document with growing alarm. It was a fraudulent insurance claim dated just 3 days ago, listing him and Tommy as the policyholders for the stolen artwork. According to the forged paperwork, they had been paying premiums on the collection for over 2 years and were now filing a claim for recovery of their legitimately owned pieces. Someone put this in your files, Marcus said, understanding the implications immediately. Someone with access to your house who knows enough about insurance fraud to create convincing documentation. Tommy's hands were shaking as he continued searching through his paperwork. There's more. Look at this. He pulled out what appeared to be a rental agreement for a storage facility, backdated 6 months, and bearing both their signatures in handwriting that looked authentic, but which neither man remembered signing. They're setting us up, Marcus realized. If anyone investigates our story about finding this stuff in a container, these documents will make it look like we've been involved in insurance fraud all along. The sophistication of the frame job was breathtaking. Someone had gained access to Tommy's personal files and planted evidence that would support a narrative of deliberate criminal activity rather than accidental discovery. Worse, the documents were convincing enough that even law enforcement might initially accept them as genuine. Tommy was pulling drawers from his desk, searching for any other planted evidence. Marcus, if they can do this to my paperwork, what else have they done? My bank records, my tax filings, God knows what else they might have access to. Marcus felt his world tilting as he realized the scope of the conspiracy they had walked into. The criminals weren't just trying to recover stolen artwork. They were systematically destroying any credibility he and Tommy might have with law enforcement. "We need to call Agent Chen," Marcus said, reaching for his phone. "With what? How do we prove these documents are fake? How do we explain that someone broke into my house just to plant evidence that makes us look guilty of the exact crimes we're trying to report?" The question hung in the air as both men realized how impossible their situation had become. Even if they could prove the documents were fraudulent, the very existence of sophisticated forgeries suggested involvement with criminal organizations that had resources far beyond anything two working-class men from New Jersey could access. Legitimately, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text. "Message from an unknown number. Check your bank account. Then call me. You have 1 hour." The message included a phone number he didn't recognize. With growing dread, Marcus called his bank's automated service and checked his account balance. The number that the computerized voice recited made no sense. According to the bank's records, someone had deposited $127,000 into his checking account that morning. "Tommy, check your bank account now." Tommy's call revealed a similar deposit, $133,000, that had appeared overnight without any documentation or explanation. Both men stared at their phones, as if the devices had transformed into evidence of crimes they hadn't committed. "They're making it look like we've been paid for the artwork," Marcus said. "Like we're part of whatever criminal network has been trafficking this stuff." The realization was devastating in its implications. Anyone investigating their story would now find forged insurance documents, rental agreements for storage facilities, and bank deposits that suggested long-term involvement in art trafficking. The narrative of accidental discovery would be impossible to maintain against such comprehensive, fabricated evidence. Tommy slumped into his kitchen chair, overwhelmed by the professional efficiency with which their lives were being dismantled. "We can't go to the FBI now. They'll think we've been lying about everything from the beginning, and we can't ignore this either. Whoever is doing this wants us to call that number. They want us to know how completely they've compromised our situation." Marcus looked around Tommy's modest kitchen, realizing that even this familiar space might be under surveillance. If criminals could plant documents in filing cabinets and manipulate bank records, they certainly had the resources to monitor conversations and track movements. "We're not dealing with common criminals," Marcus said quietly. "We're dealing with people who have access to financial systems, government databases, maybe even law enforcement networks. So what do? We call that number, and we find out exactly what they want us to do with our new identities as art thieves." The burner phone Tommy had purchased at a convenience store felt like their last connection to a world where they still had choices. After discovering the planted evidence and mysterious bank deposits, they had abandoned their regular phones and left Tommy's house through the bakery's rear entrance, carrying only essential items and the growing certainty that their old lives were over. The motel room in Trenton was the kind of place that asked no questions and accepted cash payments. But even its anonymity felt insufficient protection against the forces pursuing them. Marcus sat on one of the two beds, carefully unwrapping one of the smaller paintings they had managed to smuggle out of Tommy's garage before the surveillance became too obvious. "I still can't believe this is real," Tommy said, examining what appeared to be an original Pollock worth more than both their houses combined. 3 weeks ago I was worried about making rent. Now we're fugitives sitting on $20 million worth of stolen art. Marcus had been thinking the same thing. The transformation of their circumstances felt surreal, like they had accidentally stepped through a portal into someone else's nightmare. The artwork that had initially represented hope for financial security had become evidence in a criminal conspiracy they didn't understand and couldn't escape. The burner phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chen. "Need to meet. Your situation has become more complicated. Federal building too dangerous. Will contact with location. More complicated how?" Tommy asked after reading the message over Marcus's shoulder. They had been hiding for 36 hours, moving between cheap motels and trying to research potential buyers for the artwork through public library computers. What they had discovered was disturbing. The underground art market was controlled by the same criminal networks that Agent Chen had described, making independent sales virtually impossible. "Look at this," Marcus said, pulling up a website on his laptop that specialized in art recovery services. The page displayed photographs of their exact pieces, along with warnings about dangerous individuals who might attempt to sell them. "They've made us famous in all the wrong circles." Tommy studied the photographs with growing unease. "These pictures are better quality than the ones we took. How did they get detailed images of pieces that have been wrapped in plastic for 15 years? The question had been bothering Marcus as well. The photographs showed the artwork in pristine condition, professionally lit and documented, with the kind of expertise that suggested museum-quality handling. Someone had unwrapped, photographed, and rewrapped their collection without leaving any obvious evidence of the intrusion. "They were in Tommy's garage longer than we realized," Marcus said. "Maybe the break-in we recorded wasn't the first one." The burner phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Marcus answered cautiously, expecting another criminal ultimatum or federal warning. "Marcus, it's Chen. Listen carefully. Don't go back to either of your homes. Don't contact family members. Don't use credit cards or ATM machines. The people you're dealing with have resources we underestimated." "What kind of resources?" "The kind that includes corrupted law enforcement. Someone in federal custody leaked information about our investigation. The criminals know about our offer of witness protection, and they're using that knowledge to discredit anything you might tell us." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized the implications. If the criminal network had sources inside law enforcement, then cooperation with the FBI might be more dangerous than hiding on their own. "What are you suggesting we do?" "Disappear completely. Take the artwork and find buyers outside the traditional networks. Use the money to create new identities and relocate permanently. It's the only way you'll survive this." Tommy was listening to the conversation with growing alarm. The suggestion that they become permanent fugitives felt like a death sentence for everything they had worked to build: relationships, community ties, family connections. "What about our families?" Marcus asked. "Your families are safer if you disappear. The criminals will lose interest in pressuring them if you're no longer accessible through traditional means." After hanging up, Marcus and Tommy sat in the dingy motel room, surrounded by artwork, worth more than small countries' annual budgets, while realizing that possessing such treasure had made them poorer than they had ever been. "We can't live like this forever," Tommy said, looking around the room that represented their new reality. "Running from place to place, never seeing our families, always looking over our shoulders." "Then we need to end this," Marcus replied. "One way or another, we need to find a way to get our lives back. How?" Marcus looked at the burner phone, thinking about all the people who wanted to control their fate. "By taking control of the situation ourselves." The warehouse keys felt heavier than their size warranted as Marcus examined the set of industrial-grade locks that would secure their final gambit. The abandoned warehouse in Camden had been Tommy's suggestion. A building his brother-in-law had mentioned was scheduled for demolition, but still had power and water service. "Are you sure about this plan?" Tommy asked, reviewing their hastily drawn map of the warehouse's interior layout. They had spent 2 days preparing for what they hoped would be the end of their ordeal, but Marcus could see doubt creeping into his friend's expressions. The plan was ambitious in its simplicity. They would arrange to sell the entire collection to the highest bidder, using the transaction to draw out all the interested parties simultaneously. With everyone gathered in one location, They hoped to create enough chaos to escape, while the various criminal and federal factions focused on each other rather than two amateur art dealers from New Jersey. "It's the only way to get our lives back," Marcus replied, though his own confidence was wavering. "If we keep running, we'll never stop running. If we try to negotiate with any one group, the others will eliminate us to protect their interests." They had used their week of hiding to research potential buyers through underground art networks that operated primarily through encrypted communications and cryptocurrency transactions. What they had discovered was a shadowy market where legitimate collectors, criminal organizations, and even some museums acquired artwork through channels that avoided inconvenient questions about provenance. The buyer they had finally contacted called himself the curator and claimed to represent private collectors who specialized in historically significant pieces. His initial offer of $15 million for the complete collection had been accompanied by detailed photographs proving he knew exactly what they possessed. "The curator wants to inspect the pieces before finalizing the transaction," Tommy said, reading from encrypted messages on a laptop they had purchased with cash. "He's agreed to meet at the warehouse tomorrow night with the full payment in cryptocurrency." Marcus nodded, though something about the curator's eagerness concerned him. Legitimate buyers typically required extensive authentication processes and legal documentation before committing to multi-million-dollar purchases. The fact that the curator was willing to proceed based solely on photographs suggested either desperation or deception. "What about Chen?" Tommy asked. "Do we tell him about the meeting?" "We tell everyone about the meeting. Chen, Torino, Carbone, even the insurance companies. We make sure every interested party knows exactly when and where this transaction is happening." Tommy looked at his friend as if he had suggested jumping off a bridge. "That's insane. We'll have federal agents, organized crime figures, and God knows who else all converging on the same location." "Exactly. And while they're all focused on each other, we disappear with the money." The warehouse was perfect for their purposes, multiple entrances and exits, a layout that would allow them to observe approaching vehicles from several directions, and enough industrial equipment to provide cover if the situation deteriorated into violence. Most importantly, it was scheduled for demolition in 2 weeks, meaning any evidence left behind would be destroyed along with the building. Marcus walked through the empty space, visualizing how the evening would unfold. They would arrive early and position the artwork in the center of the main floor, with escape routes planned through 3 different exits. The various parties would presumably arrive at different times, allowing Marcus and Tommy to slip away once the bidding war or confrontation began. "There's something else," Tommy said, showing Marcus another encrypted message on the laptop. "The curator wants us to bring authentication documents proving the pieces are from the 1987 museum theft." "That's odd. Why would a buyer want proof that the artwork is stolen? Unless proving it's stolen is the whole point. Marcus, what if the curator isn't really a buyer? What if this is some kind of setup?" Marcus had been wondering the same thing. The curator's messages showed too much knowledge about their situation and too little concern about the legal risks of purchasing obviously stolen artwork. But at this point, walking into a trap seemed preferable to spending the rest of their lives running from multiple traps. "Tomorrow night, we'll find out who the curator really is," Marcus said, pocketing the warehouse keys. "And we'll find out whether 2 guys from New Jersey are smart enough to outsmart everyone who's been hunting us." Tommy looked around the empty warehouse that would either represent their salvation or their final mistake. "I hope we know what we're doing." "We don't," Marcus admitted. "But we're going to do it anyway." The original museum security photo from 1987 fell from an envelope that Marcus hadn't noticed among the authentication documents until they were setting up the artwork display in the warehouse. The black and white image showed a man in his 40s loading pieces into a legitimate transport truck, a man whose face Marcus recognized with a shock that made his hands shake. "Tommy, look at this," Marcus whispered, holding the photograph under one of the warehouse's functioning light fixtures. Look at the driver of the transport truck. Tommy squinted at the grainy image. Then his face went pale. That's him. That's the curator. He looks older now, but that's definitely the guy from the photographs he sent us. The realization hit them both simultaneously. The curator wasn't a buyer interested in purchasing stolen artwork. He was the original thief who had been trying to recover his own merchandise for 15 years. The 1987 museum heist hadn't been the work of a criminal organization. It had been an inside job, orchestrated by someone with legitimate access to the transport operation. He's been hunting for this stuff all along, Marcus said, studying the photo more carefully. The man's security badge was clearly visible, along with documentation showing he had been an authorized driver for the museum's transport contractor. He probably stored it in that container himself, then lost track of it when the shipping company went bankrupt. Tommy was reading through more of the documentation they had found hidden in the artwork packaging. Look at this transport manifest. It shows the truck making an unscheduled stop at a storage facility in Camden. That's probably where he transferred the pieces to the container. The sound of vehicles approaching the warehouse interrupted their analysis. Through the windows, they could see headlights turning into the industrial complex that surrounded their chosen meeting location. Marcus checked his watch. 7:45 p.m., 15 minutes before their scheduled meeting with the curator. That's too early, Tommy said, moving to a window that provided a better view of the parking area. And there are multiple vehicles. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he realized their plan was already falling apart. They had expected different parties to arrive separately, giving them time to assess the situation and plan their escape. Instead, it appeared that all the interested parties had coordinated their arrival. The FBI, Tommy said, pointing to unmarked sedans that were taking positions around the warehouse perimeter. And those looked like the same SUVs that were watching my garage. Through another window, Marcus could see additional vehicles arriving, a mix of luxury cars and commercial vans that suggested both criminal organizations and legitimate art recovery services were converging on their locations simultaneously. They all know about each other, Marcus realized. This isn't separate groups showing up independently. This is a coordinated operation. Tommy's face was grim as he continued watching the arrivals. We've been played. Every conversation, every negotiation, every plan we made. They were all controlling the situation from the beginning. A megaphone crackled to life outside the warehouse. This is Agent Chen, FBI. The building is surrounded. We need Marcus Rivera and Tommy Castellano to exit through the main entrance with their hands visible. So much for escaping in the chaos, Tommy said. Marcus looked around the warehouse at the artwork they had arranged so carefully, worth more money than either of them would see in multiple lifetimes. The pieces that had represented salvation had become the bait in a trap they had built for themselves through their own desperation and inexperience. There's still one option, Marcus said, pulling out the burner phone. We call the curator directly. If he's the original thief, he's as trapped as we are right now. Tommy stared at his friend as if he had suggested negotiating with the devil. You want to make a deal with the guy who's been hunting us for 2 weeks? I want to make a deal with the guy who knows how to disappear with stolen artwork and stay hidden for 15 years. Marcus, right now he needs us as much as we need him. The phone call was answered on the first ring. You found the photograph, the curator said without preamble. His voice carried the weight of someone who had been carrying secrets for decades. Your photograph, Marcus replied. From the original heist. Yes, and now we both have a problem. The FBI has been tracking our communications, and they've set up this entire situation to capture all of us simultaneously. What do you suggest? That we work together to get out of this warehouse alive? Because, Mr. Rivera, if we're all arrested tonight, none of us will live long enough to stand trial. The legal settlement document that Agent Chen produced from his briefcase 3 hours later felt like a lifeline thrown to drowning men, though Marcus suspected the rope might have thorns. The warehouse confrontation had ended not with gunfire and chaos, but with a series of arrests that swept up the criminal network while leaving him and Tommy in a strange legal limbo. "You're not under arrest," Chen explained as federal agents continued processing the scene around them. "But you're not exactly free to go either. The artwork you discovered represents evidence in multiple federal investigations, and your cooperation will determine how this situation resolves." The curator, whose real name turned out to be David Walsh, the son of the museum security director who had been quoted in the original newspaper articles, had been taken into custody along with representatives from 3 different criminal organizations. The coordination required to bring them all together had been impressive, but Marcus realized it had also put him and Tommy at the center of a prosecution that could take years to complete. "What exactly are you offering?" Tommy asked, studying the dense legal language that filled multiple pages of official documentation. Agent Martinez, who had joined them for the final negotiations, explained the terms with careful precision. "Full immunity from prosecution for your role in possessing the stolen artwork, in exchange for testimony about how you acquired it and what you observed during your possession. Additionally, the insurance companies have agreed to pay a substantial reward for recovery of the pieces." Marcus read through the settlement terms, noting that the substantial reward amounted to nearly $2 million to be split between them. It was enough money to solve their immediate financial problems while avoiding the kind of wealth that would attract unwanted attention. "There are conditions," Chen continued. "You'll need to testify in multiple trials as this case proceeds through the courts. You may be required to enter witness protection if threats develop against your safety, and you can never publicly discuss the details of how this investigation unfolded." The warehouse around them had been transformed into a crime scene that would keep federal agents busy for weeks. The artwork had been carefully removed by specialists who treated each piece as both evidence and irreplaceable cultural treasure. Marcus watched the Rothko painting being carried away in a protective case, remembering how casually he had handled it in Tommy's garage just days earlier. "What about Walsh?" Marcus asked. "The curator. David Walsh has been charged with theft, conspiracy, money laundering, and about 12 other federal crimes," Martinez replied. "His cooperation with our investigation tonight will probably reduce his sentence from life imprisonment to something closer to 25 years. Tommy looked up from the settlement. Documents with an expression Marcus had learned to recognize as his friend processing. Information that changed everything. "You knew. All along you knew who the curator was and what this was really about." Chen's slight nod confirmed what both men had suspected. "We've been tracking Walsh for 15 years. When the artwork surfaced through your social media posts, we realized we finally had an opportunity to draw him into a situation where he would have to reveal himself. So we were bait," Marcus said, understanding finally dawning. "From the moment we bought that container, you've been using us to catch Walsh and his network." "You were protected bait," Chen corrected. "We made sure you were never in real physical danger. Though I admit the psychological pressure was considerable." Marcus thought about the weeks of fear, the sleepless nights, the constant sense of being hunted by forces beyond their understanding. The federal agents had orchestrated events to create exactly that pressure, knowing it would drive them toward decisions that would flush out the criminal network. "The planted evidence in my house," Tommy said. "The bank deposits. That was all fake. Simulated evidence designed to convince the criminal network that you were more involved than you actually were," Martinez admitted. "We needed them to believe you were worth pursuing aggressively. The settlement document included provisions for counseling services, financial planning assistance, and ongoing federal protection if needed. It was comprehensive in its attempt to address the trauma that Marcus and Tommy had experienced, while ensuring their continued cooperation with law enforcement. "If we sign this," Marcus asked, "what happens to our normal lives?" You get them back, Chen said simply, with enough money to make them considerably more comfortable, and with the knowledge that you helped recover some of the most important stolen artwork in American history. Marcus looked at Tommy, seeing his own mixture of relief and exhaustion reflected in his friend's face. What do you think? I think, Tommy said, reaching for a pen, that we've had enough adventure to last several lifetimes. The business license for Rivera and Castellano container recovery services arrived in the mail on a Tuesday morning that felt like the first day of a new life. Marcus held the official document that legitimized their transformation from accidental art dealers to professional treasure hunters, though their new venture operated on a considerably smaller scale than their infamous debut. 6 months had passed since the warehouse confrontation, and the media attention had finally died down enough for them to venture back into public, without being recognized as the guys who found the stolen museum art. The reward money from the insurance companies had been divided equally between them, providing enough capital to start a legitimate business while ensuring financial security for their families. Look at this, Tommy said, entering the small office they had rented in a strip mall near the port. He carried a folder of potential container purchases for their next auction, where they would bid on abandoned cargo with the hard-earned wisdom of experience. 3 containers this week, all with reasonable starting bids. Marcus examined the auction listings with an appreciation for details that had been invisible during their first, fateful purchase. They now understood shipping manifests, customs documentation, and the warning signs that might indicate problematic contents. More importantly, they had developed relationships with legitimate dealers who could help them evaluate and market whatever they discovered. Nothing that looks like it might contain stolen art? Marcus asked with a smile that had become easier over the past few months. Nothing that looks like it might contain anything more dangerous than used furniture and electronic equipment, Tommy replied. Though I did find one container that apparently belongs to a magician who went bankrupt. Could be interesting if there are professional-grade tricks inside. Their new business model was deliberately modest. They targeted containers with clear ownership histories and focused on finding everyday items that could be cleaned, repaired, and resold through online marketplaces. It was steady, predictable work that generated enough income to support their families without attracting the kind of attention that had nearly destroyed their lives. Marcus's mother, Rosa, had been the most vocal supporter of their career change, particularly after her medical bills had been paid in full with money from the reward. She kept a framed newspaper article about their discovery on her kitchen wall, despite Marcus's embarrassment about the publicity. You boys did something important, she had told them repeatedly. You helped return stolen art to the museums where it belongs. That's something to be proud of. Tommy's wife, Maria, had been more pragmatic about their newfound prosperity, insisting that a substantial portion of the reward money be invested conservatively rather than risked on business ventures. Her wisdom had proven valuable when they discovered that running a legitimate container business required licenses, insurance, storage facilities, and a dozen other expenses they hadn't anticipated. The accountant called, Maria announced, as she arrived at their office with coffee and the homemade pastries that had become a daily ritual. Our quarterly taxes are filed, and we're officially profitable for the first time. Marcus felt a satisfaction that had been missing from his warehouse job, even though the container business was considerably more unpredictable. Some weeks they discovered valuable electronics or furniture that generated substantial profits. Other weeks they broke even or lost money on containers filled with damaged goods. But the uncertainty was balanced by the knowledge that they were building something of their own. Michael called, Tommy said, referring to Marcus's grandson, who had become increasingly interested in their business. He wants to come to the auction this weekend. Says he's thinking about learning the container business during summer break. The idea of passing their hard-earned expertise to the next generation appealed to Marcus in ways he hadn't expected. Michael, now 17 and more focused than he had been during their initial meeting, had proven to have an eye for spotting valuable items among apparent junk. As long as he understands that most containers don't contain stolen masterpieces, Marcus replied, I think he's more interested in the business side than the treasure hunting aspect. He's been talking to his guidance counselor about studying business administration in college. Marcus looked around their modest office. 2 desks, filing cabinets, a small conference table, and walls decorated with photographs of their more successful finds. It wasn't glamorous, but it represented something they had built together through their own efforts and decisions. You know what I realized yesterday? Tommy said, settling into his desk chair. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not worried about making rent next month. Best of all, Marcus added, nobody's trying to kill us for our business success. Yet, Tommy replied with a grin, the day is still young. The framed newspaper article hung in the place of honor above Marcus's desk. Its headline, Local Men Help Recover Stolen Masterpieces, serving as a daily reminder of how dramatically their lives had changed since that October morning when they bid $25 on a container nobody else wanted. 1 year later, the memory felt both distant and immediate, like a vivid dream that had somehow transformed into waking reality. Marcus arrived at the office early, as had become his habit to enjoy a few minutes of quiet reflection before the day's business began. Rivera and Castellano container recovery services had exceeded all their modest expectations, generating enough income to support both families while building a reputation for honest dealing in the competitive world of abandoned cargo recovery. The previous week had brought their most successful find yet, a container full of restaurant equipment that they had purchased for $300 and resold for nearly $8,000. It was the kind of steady, predictable profit that allowed them to sleep peacefully at night, a luxury they had learned to value above the excitement of treasure hunting. Tommy arrived with coffee and the morning paper, which still occasionally featured follow-up stories about the art theft case. David Walsh had been sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, while several members of his criminal network received shorter sentences in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations. Did you see this? Tommy asked, pointing to a small article buried on page 6. The Metropolitan Museum is planning a special exhibition featuring the recovered artwork. They're calling it Lost and Found, a journey through art history. Marcus read the article with mixed emotions. Part of him felt proud to have played a role in returning cultural treasures to public display. But another part remained uncomfortable with the attention their accidental discovery continued to generate. They want us to attend the opening reception, Tommy continued. As honored guests who made the recovery possible? I don't know. That seems like more publicity than we need. Marcus, we helped solve one of the most famous art thefts in American history. Maybe it's time to stop being embarrassed about that. Through their office window, Marcus could see the port where their adventure had begun. Container ships moved with the same mechanical precision, loading and unloading cargo that represented the dreams and failures of people around the world. Somewhere among those thousands of containers, other treasures waited to be discovered by people brave or foolish enough to bid on mysteries. The business phone rang, with a call from a potential customer who had heard about their reputation for fair dealing and professional service. Marcus listened to the woman explain that she was moving across the country and needed help evaluating some containers she had inherited from her grandfather's estate. We can certainly take a look, Marcus told her. Our evaluation fee is $50, and if we find anything valuable, we work on a percentage basis that's fair to everyone involved. After hanging up, Marcus realized how much his confidence had grown over the past year. The nervous uncertainty that had characterized their first auction had been replaced by genuine expertise earned through experience and careful study. Tommy's engagement to Maria had been announced the previous month. with wedding plans that reflected their new financial stability and confidence about the future. Marcus had been invited to serve as best man, a role that felt like recognition of how their partnership had deepened through shared adversity. "You know what I was thinking about this morning?" Tommy said, settling into his desk chair. "That container we bought changed everything, but not in the way we expected. We thought we were looking for stuff to sell. What we actually found was a business, a purpose, and proof that we could handle whatever life throws at us." Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what his friend meant. The monetary reward had been significant, but the real treasure had been the discovery that they were capable of more than they had believed. The warehouse job that had once defined Marcus's identity now felt like something he had graduated from rather than escaped. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had bid on a different container." "That day," Marcus said, "we'd probably be exactly where we are now," Tommy replied. "Maybe it would have taken longer, but we would have figured out a way to build something together. That's what friends do." As the morning sun climbed higher over the port, casting long shadows through their office windows, Marcus felt a contentment that had been absent from his life for decades. They had found something more valuable than stolen art or insurance rewards. They had found proof that ordinary people could create extraordinary changes in their own lives through courage, friendship, and the willingness to bid on mysteries they didn't understand.